The deafening crack split the sky like a bullwhip, thunder rolling across the plains as the last supporting beam of the Wilson cabin gave way. Isaac Quinn spurred his horse forward, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the roof collapse in a cloud of dust and splinters. It was 1878 in Monticello, Utah Territory, and the spring storms had been merciless, turning the ground to mud and weakening foundations throughout the settlement. "Lord Almighty," Isaac muttered, leaping from his stallion before the animal had fully stopped. His boots sank into the mud as he sprinted toward the crumbling structure. He'd been delivering supplies from his ranch to the outlying homesteads when the storm hit, forcing him to seek shelter beneath an outcropping of rock not far from the Wilson place. The widower had died last winter, leaving his 2 daughters to manage on their own, Winifred. "Willow," Isaac shouted, reaching the cabin just as another section of roof caved inward. The groaning of timber sent a chill down his spine. He'd only met the sisters a handful of times, but everyone in Monticello knew their story: 2 young women determined to keep their father's dream alive despite the hardships they faced. A faint cry came from within, barely audible over the howling wind. Isaac didn't hesitate. He kicked away debris blocking the doorway and ducked inside the darkened interior, his eyes struggling to adjust. "Where are you?" he called, coughing as dust filled his lungs. "Here," a voice answered, strained and frightened. "We're trapped in the back room." Isaac navigated carefully through what remained of the main living area. The table was crushed beneath fallen beams, and rainwater poured through gaps in the ceiling, turning the dirt floor to mud. He followed the sound of coughing to a partially collapsed doorway. "Stand back if you can," he warned, bracing his shoulder against the jammed door before forcing it open. Inside the small bedroom, he found them huddled in a corner. Winifred Keller, the elder at 23, had her arms protectively wrapped around her sister Willow, 21. Both women were pale with fear, their simple dresses covered in dust and splinters. "The whole thing started cracking," Winifred explained, her voice shaking. "We thought we could wait out the storm, but a thunderous crack interrupted her as another beam gave way above them." Without thinking, Isaac lunged forward, throwing himself over the sisters as chunks of the ceiling rained down. Pain lanced through his back, but he gritted his teeth, determined to shield them with his body. "We need to get out now," he grunted, helping them to their feet once the debris stopped falling. "This whole place is coming down." Willow's ankle was twisted, making it impossible for her to walk. Isaac lifted her into his arms while Winifred clung to his sleeve, guiding them through the hazardous remains of their home. The wind whipped at them as they emerged into the open air, rain pelting their faces like tiny needles. "My horse is just over there," Isaac shouted over the storm, nodding toward where his stallion waited nervously. "We need to get to shelter." With Willow secure in his arms and Winifred pressing close to his side, Isaac fought his way through the mud toward the animal. Behind them, the last wall of the cabin collapsed with a groan of surrender, erasing in seconds what had taken their father years to build. Winifred couldn't hold back her sob as she looked over her shoulder. "Everything we had." "You're alive," Isaac said firmly, shifting Willow's weight in his arms. "That's what matters now." They reached his horse, and with considerable effort, he managed to help both women mount. Isaac swung up behind them, one arm securing Willow while the other held the reins. His ranch was closest, barely 3 miles away, but the storm made every yard a battle. "Hold tight," he instructed, urging the horse forward. The sisters pressed against him, seeking warmth and safety as the rain continued to fall. Isaac couldn't help but notice how fragile they felt, yet there was a resilience in the way Winifred straightened her back, refusing to be beaten by their circumstances. By the time they reached his property, all 3 were soaked to the bone and shivering. Isaac's ranch house wasn't grand, a 4-room structure with solid walls and a sturdy roof, but it was dry and warm, with a fire that his ranch hand, Jeb, had kept burning in his absence. "Good heavens!" Jeb exclaimed when Isaac pushed open the door, the sisters still clinging to him. "What happened out there, boss?" The Wilson cabin collapsed, Isaac explained, guiding Winifred to a chair before carefully setting Willow on the sofa near the fire. "Jeb, fetch some blankets and heat water for tea." The older man nodded, disappearing into another room while Isaac knelt before the fireplace, adding logs to strengthen the flames. The light danced across Winifred's face as she huddled in the chair, her auburn hair darkened by rain and hanging in wet tendrils around her shoulders. Their eyes met, and Isaac was struck by the depth of emotion in her green gaze, gratitude mixed with grief and uncertainty. "Thank you," she said softly. "If you hadn't come along when you did." "No need to think on that," Isaac replied, his voice gentle. "You're safe now." Willow winced as she tried to adjust her position on the sofa. "My ankle." Isaac moved to examine it, his rough hands surprisingly careful as he removed her mud-caked boot. "It's swollen, but I don't think it's broken. We'll wrap it tight and keep it elevated." Jeb returned with blankets, which Isaac promptly wrapped around the sisters' shoulders. The ranch hand then disappeared into the kitchen to prepare tea, leaving Isaac alone with the women. "I'm afraid I don't have much in the way of ladies' clothing," Isaac admitted, running a hand through his own wet hair. "But I can offer you some clean shirts and trousers until we can dry your things." Winifred looked up at him, studying his face as if truly seeing him for the first time. At 32, Isaac Quinn was known throughout Monticello as a fair man who kept to himself. His ranch was modest but prosperous, the result of 10 years of hard work since he'd arrived from Texas with nothing but his horse and the clothes on his back. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled when wet and eyes the color of aged whiskey, he wasn't what most would call handsome in the conventional sense. But there was a strength to his features, a quiet dignity that spoke of character rather than mere appearance. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Quinn," she replied, her voice steadying. "We won't impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary." "You're not imposing," Isaac said firmly. "And please call me Isaac." Willow looked between them, a hint of a smile appearing despite her pain. "We've lost everything, Win," she said softly to her sister. "I think formality is the least of our concerns right now." The reality of their situation settled over them as Jeb returned with steaming cups of tea. The sisters had no home, no possessions beyond the clothes on their backs, and winter provisions had been destroyed in the collapse. As if reading her thoughts, Isaac spoke. "You'll stay here until we figure something out," he stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. "There's a spare bedroom you can share, and we'll ride into town tomorrow to speak with Sheriff Davis about organizing help to salvage what we can from the cabin." Winifred opened her mouth to protest, but a look from Willow silenced her. They were in no position to refuse assistance, no matter how fiercely independent they had been forced to become after their father's passing. "Thank you, Isaac," Willow said, speaking for both of them. That night, as the storm continued to rage outside, the sisters lay in Isaac's spare bed, listening to the rain pound against the roof that sheltered them. "What are we going to do, Win?" Willow whispered, her voice small in the darkness. Winifred squeezed her sister's hand. "I don't know yet. But we're alive and we have each other. We'll rebuild somehow." "He saved us," Willow murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "His arms felt so strong, like nothing could hurt us while he held us." Winifred remained awake long after her sister's breathing had evened out, thinking about the man sleeping just across the hall. There had been something in Isaac Quinn's eyes when he looked at her, something that made her heart beat faster despite the tragedy of the day. It was foolish to dwell on such things when their entire world had just collapsed, quite literally. Yet as she finally succumbed to exhaustion, it was the memory of his strong arms around them, sheltering them from falling timber, that followed her into dreams. Morning arrived with unexpected brightness, the storm having moved on during the night. Isaac was already awake and tending to chores when Winifred emerged from the bedroom, dressed in the oversized shirt and trousers he had provided. She had rolled the sleeves and pant legs, secured the waist with a piece of rope, and somehow managed to look both ridiculous and endearingly determined. "Good morning," Isaac greeted, pausing in his task of cooking breakfast. "I hope you slept well, all things considered." Better than I expected to, she admitted, moving to help him with the eggs he was scrambling. Willow's ankle is still painful, but the swelling has gone down some. Their hands brushed as she took the wooden spoon from him, and Winifred felt a peculiar warmth spread up her arm. She attributed it to the heat from the stove and focused on stirring the eggs. I thought we might ride into town after breakfast, Isaac suggested, slicing bread nearby. Sheriff Davis should know about your situation, and Mrs. Porter at the general store might be willing to extend credit for some necessities until you can get back on your feet. Winifred bit her lip, pride warring with practicality. We don't have much in the way of money, she admitted. What little we had was in a tin box in the cabin. We'll look for it when we check the remains, Isaac assured her. And don't worry about credit just yet. I can cover what you need until then. Mr. Quinn, Isaac, you've already done so much. We can't possibly accept more charity. Isaac's expression grew serious. It's not charity, Miss Keller. It's what neighbors do for each other out here. Your father would have done the same for anyone else. The mention of her father softened Winifred's resistance. Thomas Keller had indeed been known for his generosity, often to the detriment of his own family's comfort. It was one of the qualities that had made him beloved in Monticello, even as it had frustrated his practical-minded eldest daughter. Win, she said softly. My friends call me Win. A smile tugged at Isaac's lips. Win it is, then. Willow joined them shortly after, hobbling with the aid of a walking stick Isaac had fashioned for her. Breakfast was a quiet affair, but not uncomfortably so. Jeb regaled them with tales of local happenings, his weathered face animated as he described the latest antics of the mayor's troublemaking son. After the meal, Isaac helped Willow onto his wagon while Winifred climbed up beside her. The drive to town was slow, the roads still muddy from the previous day's downpour. As they traveled, Isaac pointed out features of his property: the creek that never ran dry, the stand of cottonwoods where deer often gathered at dawn, the rocky outcropping that marked his northern boundary. You've built something beautiful here, Winifred observed, taking in the well-maintained fences and healthy cattle. How long have you had this land? 7 years now, Isaac replied, pride evident in his voice. Worked as a foreman on the Carter spread for 3 years before that, saving every penny. Started with just 50 acres and a dream. And now, 240 acres, 65 head of cattle, and enough horses to keep me busy. He glanced at her. What about you and your sister? What were your plans for the homestead? Winifred's expression grew distant. We were just trying to hold on to what Pa built. The last 2 years have been. She trailed off, unwilling to burden him with the full extent of their struggles. Difficult, Willow finished for her. Wynn's been teaching at the schoolhouse 3 days a week to bring in money, and I've been taking in mending. It was barely enough, but we were managing. Isaac nodded, understanding in his gaze. Many small homesteaders faced similar challenges, especially those without the benefit of a man's labor. That the Keller sisters had maintained their independence for so long after their father's death spoke volumes about their determination. Monticello came into view as they crested a small rise, the collection of buildings appearing almost toy-like from a distance. Founded just 8 years earlier, it was still a growing community, with a church, schoolhouse, sheriff's office, saloon, and general store forming the heart of town. Several homes dotted the landscape around the main street, some grand and others humble, all representing the dreams of those who had ventured west in search of a better life. Sheriff Davis was standing outside his office when they arrived, his graying mustache twitching as he recognized the wagon's occupants. Miss Keller, he called, approaching as Isaac helped Willow down. And Miss Willow, too, heard about your cabin from Johnson, who rode past this morning. Terrible business. It happened during the storm yesterday, Winifred explained. If Mr. Quinn hadn't been passing by, she couldn't finish the thought. Good thing he was, the sheriff said, clapping Isaac on the shoulder. Always said you had good timing, Quinn. We were hoping you might organize some men to help salvage what we can, Isaac explained, and perhaps discuss what might be done to help the ladies get back on their feet. Sheriff Davis stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Town council's meeting this afternoon. I'll bring it up there. Meanwhile, I'll round up some volunteers to ride out to the homestead tomorrow, weather permitting. That work for you, Miss Keller?" Winifred nodded, grateful for the swift response. "Thank you, Sheriff. We appreciate any help. Why don't you ladies go see Mrs. Porter while I speak with the sheriff a bit more?" Isaac suggested, pressing a folded bill discreetly into Winifred's hand. "Get whatever you need for the next few days." She started to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped her. There was no pity there, only genuine concern and respect. With a small nod, she took Willow's arm and helped her toward the general store. As soon as they were out of earshot, Sheriff Davis turned to Isaac. "How bad is it really?" "Total loss," Isaac replied grimly. "Roof caved in completely, walls collapsed. There might be some personal items to salvage, but the structure itself is beyond repair." The older man sighed. "Those poor girls. Thomas Keller was a good man, but he left them with precious little. That land's not the best for farming, and they've been struggling to make payments to the bank from what I hear." Isaac's jaw tightened. "The bank, they have a loan on the property. Thomas took out a mortgage to expand 3 years ago, wanted to try raising sheep." The sheriff shook his head. "Didn't pan out, and he passed before he could turn things around. The girls have been making minimum payments, but Simmons at the bank won't extend them forever." This was worse than Isaac had realized. Not only had the sisters lost their home, but they were in danger of losing their land as well. He glanced toward the general store where he could see Winifred and Willow through the window, examining fabric with Mrs. Porter. "When's the next payment due?" he asked. "End of the month, I believe." "Why?" Isaac shook his head, just wondering how much time they have to figure things out. He didn't share the thought forming in his mind that perhaps he could help more directly than just offering temporary shelter. Inside the general store, Winifred was struggling with the same concerns. As Mrs. Porter showed them practical items they would need, she mentally calculated costs against the money Isaac had given her, trying to be as frugal as possible. "You poor dears," Mrs. Porter clucked, setting aside sturdy work dresses in their sizes. "To lose everything like that." "Where are you staying now?" "Mr. Quinn has graciously offered us shelter until we can make other arrangements," Willow explained, testing her weight on her injured ankle. Mrs. Porter's eyebrows rose slightly. "Has he now? Well, Isaac Quinn is a good man, if a bit solitary. Been wondering when he might take an interest in something beyond that ranch of his." Winifred felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's not like that, Mrs. Porter. He's simply being neighborly." The older woman smiled knowingly. "Of course, dear. Now let me show you these toiletries I just got in from Denver. Every lady needs a bit of lavender soap, especially in difficult times." By the time they left the store with their modest purchases, Isaac was waiting with the wagon, his expression thoughtful. He helped them up and secured their packages before climbing aboard himself. "Sheriff Davis is organizing a group to check the cabin tomorrow," he informed them as they started back toward his ranch. "And the town council will discuss assistance at their meeting this afternoon." "That's very kind," Winifred said, though her tone lacked conviction. She had never been comfortable accepting help, even when it was desperately needed. Isaac glanced at her, noting the tension in her shoulders. "There's no shame in needing help sometimes, Win," he said quietly. "We all do at one point or another." "Is that so?" she challenged, unable to stop herself. "And when was the last time you needed help, Mr. Quinn?" Instead of being offended, Isaac chuckled. "More recently than you might think. Last winter, my horse threw me during a snowstorm. Broke my arm and might have frozen to death if Jeb hadn't come looking when I didn't return on time. Spent 6 weeks unable to do proper work, relying on others to keep the ranch going." Winifred hadn't heard this story before. "I'm sorry," she said, genuinely contrite. "That must have been difficult for you." "It was," he admitted. "Hardest part wasn't the pain or even the work not getting done. It was accepting that I couldn't do it all myself, that I had to let others step in." He looked at her directly. "Pride's a dangerous thing out here, Win. It can keep you warm at night, but it won't feed you or rebuild your home." His words struck a chord, and Winifred found herself nodding slowly. "You're right, of course. It's just, Father always taught us to stand on our own 2 feet. Standing on your own feet doesn't mean you can't lean on someone else when the ground beneath you gives way." Isaac replied. From her place on Winifred's other side, Willow had been listening intently. "I like that," she said with a small smile. "And right now, you're the something solid we're leaning on, Mr. Quinn." Isaac's expression softened as he looked at the younger sister. "Happy to be of service, Miss Willow." The next several days established a routine. Isaac and Jeb would tend to ranch chores in the morning while the sisters made themselves useful around the house, despite Isaac's insistence that they were guests and shouldn't feel obligated. Winifred proved to be an excellent cook, and Willow, despite her injured ankle, had a talent for organization that transformed Isaac's bachelor dwelling into something approaching a home. The trip to the collapsed cabin had yielded mixed results. They recovered the tin box with the sisters' savings, a meager sum that wouldn't cover a month's expenses, let alone rebuilding costs. Some personal items were salvaged: their mother's wedding ring, their father's Bible, a few pieces of clothing that had been in a trunk protected by fallen beams. The rest was lost to the elements or damaged beyond repair. The town council had voted to provide lumber for rebuilding, but labor would be scarce until after planting season. With Willow's ankle still healing and Winifred's teaching position not resuming until fall, their immediate future remained uncertain. One evening, as they sat on Isaac's porch watching the sunset paint the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Winifred broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "We can't impose on you indefinitely," she said, her hands busy with mending one of Isaac's shirts. "I've been thinking perhaps we could inquire about rooms above the general store until the cabin can be rebuilt." Isaac, who had been whittling a small wooden horse, paused in his work. "You're not imposing," he said, a phrase that had become familiar over their time together. "Besides, those rooms are tiny and expensive. It would drain your savings in no time." "I could take on more mending," Willow suggested from her rocker. "My ankle's almost healed now. And I could see about assistant work at the doctor's office," Winifred added. "He mentioned needing help with his records last time I saw him in town." Isaac set his carving aside, his expression serious. "There's another option you might consider," he said carefully. "I've been meaning to bring it up for a few days now." Both sisters looked at him curiously. "Your land adjoins mine on the eastern boundary," he began. "It's good pastureland, though not ideal for crops, as your father discovered. I'd be interested in purchasing it at a fair price that would give you enough to start fresh, perhaps in town where opportunities might be better suited to your skills." Winifred's hands stilled, the shirt forgotten in her lap. Sell the homestead. The very idea felt like a betrayal of their father's memory. "It's just a thought," Isaac added quickly. "I know it's your family's legacy, but it's also a burden," Willow interrupted, surprising both of them with her practical tone. "Win, you know as well as I do that we've been struggling to keep up with the mortgage payments. Even if we rebuild the cabin, we'll still be facing the same challenges that had us barely scraping by before." Winifred looked between her sister and Isaac, conflicting emotions evident on her face. "I need to think about this," she said finally, rising from her chair. "If you'll excuse me," she walked down the porch steps and across the yard, her figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. Willow sighed as she watched her go. "She feels responsible for keeping Father's dream alive," she explained to Isaac, "even though it's slowly crushing her." Isaac nodded, understanding all too well the weight of obligation. "I didn't mean to upset her. The offer stands whether now or later. I just thought it might provide a solution that gives you both more options." "I know," Willow said gently, "and for what it's worth, I think it's a good one. Win just needs time to see it that way too." Later that night, Isaac found Winifred sitting on a fallen log near the creek that ran through his property. The moon was high, casting enough light to navigate by, but he carried a lantern anyway, its glow announcing his approach. "May I join you?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. Winifred nodded, making space on the log. He set the lantern between them, the warm light highlighting the weariness in her features. "I apologize if my offer was presumptuous," Isaac began. "It wasn't my intention to." "No," she interrupted. "Your offer was kind and practical." It's my reaction that requires apology. She took a deep breath. Father poured everything he had into that land, his sweat, his dreams, eventually his life. The idea of selling it feels like giving up on him somehow. Isaac was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. My father was a sharecropper in Tennessee, he said finally. Worked land that would never be his, dreaming that someday his children might have soil of their own. He died still working another man's fields. Winifred turned to look at him, surprised by this personal revelation. When I came west, Isaac continued, I thought I was fulfilling his dream by claiming land. It took years before I realized what he really wanted wasn't for me to own particular acres, but to be free to build a life that brought satisfaction. He met her gaze directly. Would your father want you to cling to struggling land out of obligation, or would he want you to find your own path to happiness? The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable yet profound. Winifred's eyes glistened in the lantern light, but no tears fell. I don't know what my path to happiness looks like anymore, she admitted softly. For so long, it's just been about survival. Then perhaps that's where you start, Isaac suggested, by asking yourself what would bring you joy, not just what would keep you alive. Their eyes held for a long moment, and something shifted in the space between them, a recognition of shared understanding, of mutual respect that might be growing into something more. Winifred looked away first, her gaze returning to the creek where water flowed ceaselessly over smooth stones. I'll consider your offer, she said finally. Truly consider it without letting pride or misplaced obligation cloud my judgment. That's all I ask, Isaac replied. They sat in companionable silence after that, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, distant cattle lowing, the gentle rustle of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl hunting in the darkness. It was peaceful in a way Winifred hadn't experienced for years, and she found herself reluctant to break the spell by returning to the house. It's beautiful here, she observed. You've created something special. Isaac nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's taken time, and it's still not everything I envisioned. Land's only part of what makes a home. The implication in his words wasn't lost on Winifred, but she wasn't ready to acknowledge it directly. Instead, she rose from the log, smoothing her borrowed trousers. We should head back. Willow will wonder where we've gone. Isaac stood as well, lifting the lantern to light their path. She's a remarkable young woman, your sister, strong in ways that aren't always obvious at first glance. She is, Winifred agreed proudly, though she's always been the dreamer between us. I'm the practical one, keeping our feet on the ground. Everyone needs dreams, Win, Isaac said as they walked, even the practical ones among us. The next morning, Winifred announced her decision during breakfast. We would like to accept your offer for the land, Isaac, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes, but I have conditions. Isaac set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. I'm listening. First, the price must be fair market value, not charity disguised as business. She held up a hand when he started to speak. I've made inquiries in town. I know what comparable land has sold for recently. Isaac nodded, impressed by her thoroughness. Agreed. Second, we want right of access to visit our parents' graves whenever we wish. Her voice softened slightly. They're buried on the north corner under the big oak. Of course, Isaac said, you'll always be welcome there. And finally, Winifred continued, exchanging a glance with Willow, we want to work for our keep while we're here. Not as guests, but as contributing members of this household. I can cook, clean, manage accounts. Willow is skilled with fabric and has a way with animals. We won't be objects of pity or charity cases. Isaac considered her conditions, understanding the pride behind them. I accept your terms with one amendment, he countered. You'll work for fair wages, not merely room and board. I've been needing help with the books and correspondence for some time, and Jeb complains regularly about the state of the barn that could use organizing. If you're offering your skills, I'm happy to compensate you properly for them. Winifred hadn't expected this response. She looked to Willow, who nodded encouragingly. Very well, she agreed. We have a deal, Mr. Quinn. Isaac, he corrected with a smile, If we're going to be working together, I think we're well past formalities." The agreement was sealed with a handshake, Winifred's smaller hand engulfed by Isaac's calloused palm. The touch lingered perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary, a fact that didn't escape Willow's notice as she watched them from across the table. The following weeks brought significant changes to the Quinn ranch. With the land deal completed at a price that even Winifred had to admit was more than fair, the sisters settled into their new roles with determination. Winifred proved to be not only an excellent cook, but also a meticulous bookkeeper, bringing order to Isaac's haphazard accounts and correspondence. Willow, once her ankle fully healed, discovered a talent for gardening and took charge of the small plot behind the house, expanding it to include vegetables and herbs that soon graced their dinner table. For his part, Isaac found himself adjusting to the presence of women in what had been a decidedly masculine domain. He caught himself watching Winifred as she worked, admiring the graceful efficiency of her movements and the intelligence that sparked in her eyes when she questioned one of his business decisions or suggested improvements. Their debates over ranch management became a highlight of his evenings, her practical insight often challenging his established ways of thinking. It was during one such discussion, nearly a month after the sisters had come to stay, that Isaac realized how thoroughly they had integrated themselves into his life. They were sitting at the kitchen table, Winifred reviewing the accounts while Isaac planned the summer grazing rotation. Willow was nearby, mending a torn shirt while humming softly. "We should consider selling the yearlings before August," Winifred suggested, looking up from her ledger. "Prices traditionally drop in late summer, and these figures show we'd benefit more from early sales, even with slightly lower weights." Isaac studied the numbers she presented. "You're right," he admitted, impressed by her analysis. "I've always held until September out of habit, but the market patterns have been shifting." Winifred smiled, pleased by his acknowledgement. "Sometimes fresh eyes see things differently." "Your eyes see a great many things mine miss," Isaac replied, his tone making the statement more personal than he had perhaps intended. A slight blush colored Winifred's cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Is that so?" "It is," he confirmed quietly from her corner. Willow cleared her throat. "I think I'll retire early tonight," she announced, gathering her sewing. "Good night, both of you." "Good night, Willow," they responded in unison, neither taking their eyes from the other as she left the room. Once alone, a new tension filled the space between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken possibilities. Isaac was the first to break the silence. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he began, closing the grazing map he'd been working on. "There's a social at the church this Saturday. Would you and Willow consider attending with me?" Winifred's eyebrows rose slightly. "A social? I didn't take you for one who enjoys such gatherings, Isaac." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of slight embarrassment. "I'm not generally, but I thought it might be good for you and Willow to reconnect with folks in town, and perhaps," he hesitated, "perhaps I'd enjoy it more with the right company." The implication was clear, and Winifred felt her heart beat a little faster. Since coming to Isaac's ranch, she had deliberately pushed aside the growing attraction she felt toward him, focusing instead on practical matters of survival and rebuilding. But in quiet moments like this, it became increasingly difficult to ignore. "I think we would enjoy that," she said finally, her voice softer than usual. "Willow especially would appreciate the outing. And you?" Isaac asked, his gaze intent. "Would you appreciate it as well?" Winifred met his eyes directly. "I would, yes, though I have nothing suitable to wear for such an occasion." "I'm sure Mrs. Porter could help with that," Isaac suggested. "Consider it part of your wages." "Always the practical solution," Winifred observed with a small smile. "Is that what I am to you, Isaac? A practical arrangement?" The question hung between them, more revealing than she had intended. Isaac leaned forward, his expression serious. "You know that's not true," he said quietly. "Not anymore if it ever was." Winifred's breath caught at the directness of his response. Before she could formulate a reply, Isaac stood and moved around the table until he was standing beside her chair. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. Uncertain of his intentions but trusting him implicitly, Winifred placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could detect the subtle scent of leather and pine that she had come to associate with his presence. "Winifred Keller," Isaac began, still holding her hand. "I want to be clear about something. What started as neighborly assistance has become much more to me. I admire your strength, your intelligence, your unwavering dedication to your sister. I enjoy your company more than I can properly express." Winifred felt as though she couldn't quite catch her breath. "Isaac, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know this isn't the most conventional of circumstances. You came here out of necessity, not choice. I never want you to feel that your presence in my home or in my life is contingent on anything other than your own wishes. If you choose to move on when you've saved enough, I'll understand and support that decision." The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable, and Winifred felt something within her softening, walls built from years of self-reliance beginning to crumble. "And if I choose to stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaac's fingers tightened slightly around hers. "Then I would be the happiest man in the territory," he admitted. "But that's a decision only you can make and one you shouldn't rush." Winifred studied his face, the earnest expression, the vulnerability he was allowing her to see despite his natural reserve. In that moment, she recognized what had been growing between them these past weeks wasn't merely gratitude or convenience, but something deeper and more meaningful. "I don't know what the future holds," she said honestly. "But I do know that being here, working alongside you, has brought me a sense of purpose and contentment I thought I'd lost when the cabin collapsed. Perhaps that's worth exploring further." A smile slowly spread across Isaac's face, transforming his features. "I'd like that very much, Win." He raised her hand and, with a gentleness that belied his strength, pressed his lips to her knuckles in a gesture both old-fashioned and profoundly affecting. Winifred felt the touch like a spark igniting something within her that had long been dormant, hope, perhaps, or the beginning of joy. The church social proved to be a turning point for all of them. Winifred and Willow arrived wearing new dresses purchased from Mrs. Porter's store, Winifred in deep blue that complemented her auburn hair, and Willow in soft green that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Isaac, dressed in his Sunday best with his dark hair neatly combed, looked so different from his usual ranch attire that both sisters teased him mercilessly on the ride to town. The community hall attached to the church was decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, with tables of food lining one wall and a small group of musicians setting up in the corner. As they entered, several people approached to greet them, many expressing relief at seeing the Keller sisters looking so well after their ordeal. Winifred, Willow, Mrs. Davis, the sheriff's wife, hurried over to embrace them. "We've been so worried about you both. And look at you now, positively glowing." Her gaze shifted to Isaac, standing slightly behind them. "Mr. Quinn, how good of you to bring the girls tonight." Isaac tipped his hat politely. "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Davis." As the evening progressed, Winifred found herself observing the interactions around her with new perspective. The community she had always been part of, yet somewhat removed from due to the remote location of their homestead, now embraced her and Willow warmly. Several of the town's young men asked Willow to dance, her natural charm and grace making her a popular partner despite her recent injury. Isaac, to Winifred's surprise, proved to be an excellent dancer himself, guiding her through a waltz with confidence that belied his usual reticence in social settings. "You've been hiding talents from me, Mr. Quinn," she teased as they moved across the floor. "Where did a rancher learn to waltz so skillfully?" "My mother's insistence," he replied with a small smile. "She believed every gentleman should know how to dance properly, regardless of his station. She taught me herself, using our kitchen as a ballroom." The image of a young Isaac learning to dance under his mother's guidance was unexpectedly touching. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was, Isaac agreed, his expression softening with memory. Strong, practical, but with an appreciation for beauty and grace even in difficult circumstances. You remind me of her in some ways. Winifred wasn't sure whether to be flattered or concerned by the comparison. I hope that's a good thing. The highest compliment I could give, Isaac assured her, his hand warm and steady at her waist as he guided her through a turn. She would have liked you very much, I think. As the evening wore on, Winifred found herself drawn repeatedly to Isaac's side, their conversation flowing easily whether discussing ranch matters or exchanging observations about their neighbors. Several times she caught Willow watching them with a knowing smile, which Winifred pretended not to notice. Near the end of the night, as they stood together by the refreshment table, Sheriff Davis approached them with a friendly nod. "Quinn, Miss Keller," he greeted. "Fine evening, isn't it? Wanted to let you know the town council approved funds to help with rebuilding efforts for families affected by the spring storms. Your names are on that list, of course." Winifred and Isaac exchanged a glance. "That's very generous, Sheriff," she began carefully. "But our situation has changed somewhat. Mr. Quinn has purchased our land and we've come to an arrangement regarding our future plans." The sheriff's eyebrows rose as he looked between them. "I see," he said, a hint of speculation in his tone. "Well, that's good news then. Glad to hear things are working out for you folks." He tipped his hat and moved away, already sharing the news with his wife in a low voice. "I believe we've just become the subject of town gossip," Isaac observed dryly. Winifred laughed. Was there ever any doubt? Two unmarried women living under the roof of Monticello's most eligible bachelor. "I'm surprised it took this long for talk to start. Does it bother you?" Isaac asked, suddenly serious. She considered the question honestly before answering. "Not as much as it might have once. I've learned there are more important things than what others might think." Isaac's expression softened as he looked down at her. Such as finding unexpected happiness in the aftermath of disaster," Winifred replied, her voice quiet but steady. "Such as discovering that sometimes what seems like the end of one path is actually the beginning of another, better one." Their gazes held, the noise and activity of the social fading into the background as something passed between them, an understanding, a promise, perhaps even the first stirrings of love. The moment was broken by Willow's arrival, her cheeks flushed from dancing. "This has been the most wonderful evening," she declared, linking her arm with her sister's. "But I'm absolutely exhausted. Might we head home soon?" Home. The word resonated differently now, Winifred realized. No longer the collapsed cabin of their childhood, but the sturdy ranch house where Isaac had welcomed them, where they had built a new life from the wreckage of the old. "Of course," Isaac agreed. "Let me fetch the wagon." As summer progressed toward fall, life on the Quinn Ranch settled into a rhythm that suited all three of its inhabitants. Winifred's role expanded beyond bookkeeping to include partnership in many of Isaac's decisions regarding the ranch's operations. Her practical mind and eye for detail complemented his experience and vision, resulting in several innovations that promised to increase their productivity in the coming year. Willow, meanwhile, had discovered a talent for working with the younger horses, her gentle patience winning over even the most spirited colts. She had also taken charge of the ranch's correspondence, writing letters that secured better prices for their cattle and more favorable terms with suppliers. The relationship between Isaac and Winifred continued to develop, though neither rushed to define it too explicitly. Their evenings often found them sitting on the porch, discussing the day's events or sharing stories from their pasts. Occasionally, when Willow had already retired, Isaac would reach for Winifred's hand, their fingers intertwining as they sat in companionable silence beneath the star-filled sky. It was during one such evening in late August that Isaac finally broached the subject they had been dancing around for weeks. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of Winifred's hand. "About what I want for this ranch and for my life." Winifred turned to look at him, her heart beating a little faster at his serious tone. "And what conclusions have you reached?" That I don't want to do it alone anymore, he said simply. That having you here, both of you, has shown me what I've been missing all these years. The implication was clear, but Winifred needed to hear it directly. Isaac, are you saying? I'm saying that I love you, Winifred Keller, Isaac interrupted gently. I've grown to love your strength, your determination, your practical mind and generous heart. I love the way you challenge me to be better, to think differently. I love watching you with Willow, seeing the devotion between you, and selfishly, I love the way you look at me sometimes, as if you might be coming to feel the same. Tears welled in Winifred's eyes, unexpected but not unwelcome. For so long, she had focused on survival, on responsibility, on keeping her sister safe and honoring her father's memory. The idea of personal happiness, of love, had seemed an unaffordable luxury. I do feel the same, she admitted, her voice thick with emotion, though it frightens me how much. Isaac shifted to face her more directly. What frightens you about it, depending on someone else, she explained. Opening myself to the possibility of loss again. We've lost so much already, Isaac, our parents, our home, the idea of risking my heart. I understand fear, Isaac said softly. After my parents died, I closed myself off for years, convinced that self-reliance was the only safe path. But I've learned that a life without connection is hardly living at all. He squeezed her hand gently. I can't promise we won't face hardships or losses, Win. But I can promise that whatever comes, we would face it together. Winifred looked out at the land spreading before them, rolling hills dotted with cattle, fields that would soon be ready for harvest, the distant mountains painted purple by the setting sun. This place that had once been foreign to her now felt like home in a way the cabin never quite had. I love you too, she said finally, the words emerging with surprising ease once she allowed herself to speak them. And I want a future with you here. The joy that transformed Isaac's face was answer enough, but he expressed it further by raising her hand to his lips, placing a kiss on her palm before closing her fingers around it as if to preserve the gesture. There's something else I need to ask you then, he continued, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small object. I've been carrying this for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. In his hand lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the last light of day. It wasn't elaborate or ostentatious, but its elegant simplicity suited Winifred perfectly. This was my mother's, Isaac explained. The one thing of value I brought with me when I came west. I always hoped to give it to the woman I would spend my life with, but I never truly believed I'd find her. His eyes held her steadily. Winifred Keller, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Though she had sensed the conversation was heading in this direction, the actual proposal still took her breath away. For a moment she could only stare at the ring glinting in his palm, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering, not just marriage, but partnership, family, a shared future built on mutual respect and love. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly, yes, Isaac, I will marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit almost perfectly, requiring just the slightest adjustment to sit comfortably. Like their relationship, Winifred thought not without its small imperfections, but fundamentally right in all the ways that mattered. Isaac leaned forward, his hand gently cupping her cheek as he brought his lips to hers for their first kiss. It was tender and unhurried, a promise rather than a demand. Winifred found herself responding naturally, her hands resting against his chest as she returned the kiss with equal gentleness. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I should speak with Willow, he murmured. Ask for her blessing. Winifred smiled at his traditional sensibilities. She'll give it gladly. She's been hoping for this outcome for weeks now. Has she? Isaac asked, looking pleased. Clever girl. Far more observant than we gave her credit for, Winifred agreed. She told me just yesterday that she's never seen me happier than I've been these past months with you. And is she right? Winifred nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. Completely right. Despite everything we've lost, I've found something I never expected, to have a man who sees me as I am and loves me not in spite of my practical nature, but because of it. They shared another kiss, this one deeper and more assured, before reluctantly parting to go inside and share their news with Willow, who received it with delighted squeals and immediate questions about wedding plans. The ceremony took place in early October, when the aspens on the mountainsides had turned to gold and the air held the first crisp hint of approaching winter. The entire town of Monticello turned out for the occasion, the church filled to capacity as Winifred walked down the aisle on Sheriff Davis's arm, Willow preceding her as maid of honor. Isaac waited at the altar, looking more handsome than Winifred had ever seen him in his new suit, his expression one of barely contained wonder as she approached in her ivory gown, simple but elegant, sewn by Mrs. Porter and several other ladies of the town as their wedding gift. The vows they exchanged were traditional but heartfelt, each word spoken with clear conviction. When Isaac slipped the gold band onto her finger to join the engagement ring, Winifred felt a sense of rightness that transcended the occasion itself, as though her life had been leading to this moment through all its twists and hardships. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As was tradition, many of the townspeople contributed to the feast, resulting in a spread that represented the best of what the community had to offer. There were gifts, 2 practical items for the household, handcrafted treasures that would become family heirlooms, and a particularly special offering from Willow. "I've been working on this in secret," she confessed as she handed Winifred a carefully wrapped package during a quiet moment at the reception. "I hope you'll like it." Inside was a quilt, meticulously pieced together from salvaged fabric from their old cabin, bits of curtains their mother had sewn, a section of their father's favorite shirt, pieces of the girls' childhood dresses, all arranged in a pattern that somehow captured the essence of their family history. "Oh, Willow," Winifred breathed, tears filling her eyes as she ran her fingers over the familiar textures. "It's beautiful. How did you manage this?" "I saved what I could from the wreckage," Willow explained, "and Mrs. Porter helped me with the design. I wanted you to have something of our past to take into your future." Isaac, standing beside his new bride, was equally moved by the gift. "This will have a place of honor in our home," he promised, his arm around Winifred's waist. "Thank you, Willow." The younger sister beamed, clearly pleased by their reaction. "I've been thinking," she ventured, "about my own future as well." "Oh," Winifred looked up from the quilt, curiosity replacing her emotion. "Dr. Matthews has offered me a position as his assistant," Willow explained. "He says I have a natural touch with patients and he's willing to teach me more about medicine. I thought perhaps I might take a room in town to be closer to the practice." Winifred exchanged a glance with Isaac, who nodded encouragingly. "If that's what you want, we'll support you completely," she assured her sister. "Though you know you always have a home with us." "I know," Willow smiled, "but you're beginning a new chapter now, and perhaps it's time I started one of my own as well. Besides," she added with a mischievous twinkle, "I'll only be 3 miles away. Close enough to visit regularly, but far enough to give you newlyweds some privacy." Winifred blushed at the implication, but Isaac laughed, his affection for his sister-in-law evident. "A wise decision, though we'll miss having you under our roof every day." The remainder of the celebration passed in a blur of congratulations, dancing, and moments of quiet joy when Isaac would catch Winifred's gaze across the room, his expression conveying all that words could not. When they finally departed for home, their home now, truly shared, the townspeople sent them off with cheers and good wishes. The ranch house had been transformed in their absence, thanks to the efforts of Jeb and several friends. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, the bed was made up with new linens, another wedding gift, and a bottle of champagne waited on the kitchen table, an extravagance from Sheriff Davis, who had it shipped specially from Denver for the occasion. As Isaac carried Winifred across the threshold, a tradition she had protested but secretly appreciated, she was struck by how different this homecoming felt from her first arrival at the ranch. Then, she had been desperate, frightened, her world literally collapsed around her. Now she returned as mistress of the house, wife to a man she loved deeply, her future spread before her full of promise rather than uncertainty. "Happy, Mrs. Quinn?" Isaac asked softly, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for pulling us from that collapsed cabin, Isaac, for being the shelter we needed when we had nothing." "I think perhaps we saved each other," he replied, covering her hand with his own. "My life was solid but empty before you came into it. You and Willow brought light back to this house, reminded me what it means to be part of something larger than myself." They sealed this truth with a kiss, the first of many they would share in the years to come. Later, as they lay together beneath Willow's quilt, the past and future woven together in its threads, Winifred reflected on the strange turns life could take. A collapsing cabin, a passing cowboy, a rescue that became the foundation for love's circumstances that might have broken a weaker spirit, had instead led her to unexpected happiness. Spring arrived the following year, bringing with it new life to the Quinn Ranch. The cattle herd had increased by 20% thanks to Winifred's meticulous breeding records and Isaac's improved grazing rotation. The fields promised a bountiful harvest, and the orchard Willow had helped plant before moving to town showed signs of healthy growth. Most significant, however, was the news Winifred shared with Isaac one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "I visited Dr. Matthews today," she began, her hand unconsciously resting on her abdomen. "He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now." Isaac turned to her, hope and question in his eyes. "Win, we're going to have a baby," she confirmed, her smile radiant, "in late October around our anniversary." The joy that transformed Isaac's face was something Winifred would remember for the rest of her life, pure, unguarded happiness that made him look years younger. He gathered her in his arms with gentle reverence, pressing his lips to her forehead. "A baby," he whispered, awe evident in his voice. "Our child. The first of several, I hope," Winifred replied, leaning into his embrace. "I always wanted a large family, though I never thought it would be possible." "Whatever you want is possible now," Isaac promised. "We'll build a life for our children that's secure and filled with love." News of the impending arrival spread quickly through Monticello, with Willow being particularly ecstatic at the prospect of becoming an aunt. She had thrived in her position with Dr. Matthews, demonstrating an aptitude for medicine that surprised even herself. The town had embraced her as one of their own, and there were rumors of a potential courtship with the young schoolmaster who had arrived the previous fall. The months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Isaac insisted on building a proper nursery adjoining their bedroom, crafting a cradle from pine with his own hands. Winifred, never one for idleness despite her condition, managed the ranch books from home while sewing tiny garments and planning for the future. On a crisp October morning, with golden leaves drifting past the windows and the scent of wood smoke in the air, Winifred gave birth to a son. He arrived after a long but uncomplicated labor, with Willow and Dr. Matthews in attendance and Isaac pacing anxiously in the hallway until the first lusty cry announced the baby's arrival. "You have a son, Mr. Quinn," Willow announced, opening the door with a broad smile. "A strong, healthy boy with his mother's chin and your forehead." Isaac entered the bedroom with reverent steps, his eyes immediately finding Winifred propped against the pillows, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile soft with love and accomplishment. "Come meet your son," she invited, shifting the blanket to reveal a tiny face, eyes tightly closed, wisps of dark hair plastered to a perfectly formed head. Isaac sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one large finger gently touching the baby's cheek. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're both perfect. We thought perhaps we might name him Thomas after my father," Winifred suggested. "Thomas Isaac Quinn." "A fine name," Isaac agreed, his gaze moving from his son to his wife, love for both overwhelming him. "Thank you, Win, for everything, for coming into my life, for loving me, for our son." "I'm the one who should be thanking you," she replied softly, if you hadn't been riding past our cabin that day." The thought went unfinished, neither wanting to dwell on what might have been lost. Instead, Isaac leaned forward to kiss her gently, then pressed his lips to his son's forehead, sealing the circle of family that had been created from the ashes of disaster. In the years that followed, the Quinn family grew and prospered. Thomas was joined by a sister, Sarah, 2 years later, and eventually by another brother, William. The ranch expanded as well, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory under Isaac and Winifred's joint management. Willow eventually married the schoolmaster, settling in a house near the center of Monticello, where she assisted Dr. Matthews until his retirement, at which point she took over much of his practice, having studied formally in Denver for 2 years. Her home became a gathering place for her niece and nephews, who adored their aunt's stories and the cookies she always had waiting for them. On the 10th anniversary of the cabin collapse, Isaac and Winifred took their children to visit the site, now part of their expanded ranch property. Little remained of the original structure, nature having reclaimed most of it, but Isaac had erected a simple stone marker near the family graves, commemorating Thomas and Mary Keller and the homestead they had established. "This is where your mother lived when I first met her," Isaac explained to the children as they stood before the marker. "A storm caused the cabin to collapse, and I happened to be riding by. Papa saved Mama and Aunt Willow," Thomas, now 9 and looking more like his father every day, recounted proudly. His arms were stronger than the wood. Winifred smiled at the familiar phrase, one that had become part of their family lore. "That's right. He pulled us from the wreckage and gave us shelter when we had nowhere else to go." "And then you fell in love," 7-year-old Sarah added dreamily, always the romantic of the family. "Not right away," Winifred corrected gently. "First we became friends, then partners. Love grew from there, like a seed that needs time and care to become something strong and lasting." Isaac's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close to his side. "Some good can come from even the darkest times," he told the children. "Remember that when you face your own storms someday." As they walked back to their waiting wagon, Winifred paused to look once more at the place where her life had changed so dramatically. The loss had been painful, the future uncertain, but from that moment of crisis had emerged the greatest happiness she had ever known. No regrets. Isaac asked softly, noting her thoughtful expression. Winifred turned to him with a smile, taking in the man who had become her husband, partner, and best friend, and the beautiful children they had created together. "Not one," she assured him, her hand finding his. "Every step of the journey led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." They rode home as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across land that had witnessed both tragedy and triumph. The ranch house waited, solid and welcoming, lights glowing in the windows, not just a shelter from the elements, but a home built on love, respect, and the courage to begin again when life's storms had passed. For Winifred and Isaac Quinn, that home represented everything they had found in each other. Strength greater than any wood or stone, and love more enduring than any structure built by human hands.